Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the April 3rd, 2024 special meeting of the Board of Selectmen, public hearing for blight ordinance. I'm First Selectman Colin Moore, and call this meeting to order. If everyone would rise and join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, at this time I'm going to open up the public hearing on the blight ordinance, and we have Town Attorney Derek Donnelly here to present and go through the PowerPoint.
Great.
Thanks for joining us, Derek.
Thank you. Thank you for having me tonight. So we've been talking about the blight ordinance for some time. We have not talked about it in a little while. So what I thought I would do is refresh everyone's recollection with a short PowerPoint presentation. For members of the audience, there are copies of the blight ordinance up front on the desk. More are coming, but you're welcome to grab a copy if you would like to follow along. Chris, can you go into slide view, or is this for presentation view?
From the opposite slide show.
All right, good.
To the right.
To the right? Right. Right to the left of that? To the right of that? Okay, you drive right there, okay. I'm not used to that. Okay, there we go.
Perfect. All right, and this is being shared online? Okay, perfect. Okay, we gotta go one back. Yeah. There we go.
All right, I'm good.
Okay. So, again, we have a proposed blight ordinance. So blight ordinance is authorized by the Connecticut Municipal Powers Act. The legislature went back and made some changes to how they handle blight just last year. So a lot of what this reflects is work that the town has been considering over the course of several years, but most recently has incorporated the changes that the legislature made to the statute with respect to blight. So if you drive around town, you know, Suffield is not immune from dealing with blight. We see it, blighted properties all over town. It does have an adverse effect both on property values and on economic development. And there's also major health and safety and general welfare threats that come with it as well. As you know, we're dealing with some of the more serious properties that we've had to deal with over the last year. So how do you correct that? Well, we can correct that. Okay, Karen. So if anyone needs someone. So the idea is we can, behind the blight ordinance is really to try to push the rehabilitation, reconstruction, and reuse of vacant blighted properties, or even to eliminate those totally. Obviously, there are some major concerns here. We're talking about people's property, and we're talking about people's property rights. So the goal of this ordinance is to balance the need to eliminate the blighted properties with the property rights of citizens. So in doing so, we've provided a lot of flexibility here to consider unique situations, unique circumstances to a property and its owners. When you're settled, you can go to the next page. So the prohibited acts, we're going to, you see it right there, no person, firm, business entity, voluntary association, or nonprofit organization shall cause or permit blighted property or blighted properties, as defined herein, to be created or the existence thereof continued on any real property located in the town of Suffield in such a manner that it causes or contributes to blight. And we're specifically targeting abandoned and vacant property, which is any property that a reasonable observer would determine has been relinquished by its former owner and is currently vacant. Blighted property, any property that shows outward signs of severe decay, which presents or contributes to a risk of health, safety, or the general well-being of the town. And you can think there of some abandoned properties that we know of. We've had to fence off. We've had to take action to make sure that kids were trying to get in there and get hurt. And then we're looking at this from property maintenance violation. It's any property that, while not abandoned, shows outward signs of decay, deterioration, dilapidation, or being the second one. Examples of blight, and we go through some examples there. It's any condition that poses a serious threat to safety, health, and or general welfare of the town, and that is to be determined by the blight enforcement officer, building official, zoning enforcement officer, or health inspector. Any condition attracting illegal activity to the property, and that's to be documented by the Central Police Department. Any condition creating a fire hazard, as determined by the fire marshal. Lack of maintenance, and then chronic presence of broken down vehicles or an obvious state of disrepair. So examples of the property maintenance violations, because I think we did want to be the most careful there with how we do this. Again, when we're talking about blight, it is very hard to define, so we want to be very, very careful to separate those property maintenance violations from what we would see as more severe, more significant risks to health and safety. So when it comes to property maintenance violations, talking about missing or boarded up windows or doors, collapsed or missing walls or roofs, visibly rotting materials, cracked, leaking, crumbling foundations, and any conditions that hinder the use and enjoyment of the neighboring properties. Is that the next one? Oh, you're good. Well, you're good.
I'm driving that.
All right, we did also carve out some exclusions. Active farms are being excluded as defined in the zoning regulations, and lands preserved through conservation easements. The board asked me to consider after the last meeting whether or not we were going to include, we had defined as inlands and wetlands in that area. After looking at it, after looking at the considering some of the comments that were made and going back and actually getting into the GIS system and looking at buildings that might be built in wetlands as we define it in our GIS system. And look, our GIS system is not 100% accurate. It's a best understanding of where the wetlands are located on the property. But there are quite a bit of properties, particularly what we would say in the zoning regulations are accessory use structures that are located in wetlands for whatever reason. So as a result, after looking at just the sheer numbers, it seemed that excluding buildings in the wetlands was a bad idea. Okay, so we have taken that out, and I think it was Mr. Kaufman who brought that up at prior meetings, and I think that was a good revision to it. And then obviously, what we've tried to do with the blight ordinance is give some flexibility and the ability of the blight enforcement officer to give special consideration to people in certain conditions. And those include the disability of the property owner, age of the property owner, and the financial status of the property owner. The blight enforcement officer, and what we're really talking about in the blight enforcement officer is really the building official, right, serving in one of those capacities. So would be supervised with board of selectmen, may initiate inspections and investigations, and turn those into violations. But we wanted to make sure that we were doing this with an eye to customer service. So while the blight enforcement officer can take actions, I want to make sure that before we go to the point of finding a property owner, we're trying to work with them. So we've structured in 2 attempts, and those are it says right in the ordinance, documented attempts to resolve an issue with a property owner before it goes to a fine situation. And the way that works is the blight enforcement officer would reach out, would attempt to remedy the situation on 2 documented attempts. We would do those in the same manner that we do zoning enforcement violations. Our zoning enforcement officer reaches out, they document what the issue is, they give somebody a reasonable amount of time, usually 30 to 60 days to cure that. If that hasn't been done, they try again. Only then, if it still hasn't been done after that second period, they move on to the citation process. So the ordinance also creates a citation process, and that's important for a couple different reasons. First of all, it's required by the statute here before we can issue think of it like a ticket. Before we can issue a ticket, we need the blight enforcement officer to give people the ability to appeal it and to go through a hearing process. But it also creates a board that can serve as a hearing board for other types of violations that the town has on the books and does not use because we don't currently have an appeals board. The historic district in particular has been clamoring for this for a number of years, and I don't blame them. There's no teeth to an ordinance unless you can enforce it. We haven't been able to do that in a lot of different ways. We actually, believe it or not, we do have even parking violations in town, although very rarely are those issued. But again, that's the type of thing, municipal fine, somebody could then appeal to an appeals board. And that process is set up here as well. And if you do go through all that, right, at that point, you can be issued penalties. And we're talking about penalties to the tune of $100 a day. That moves on to issuance of liens if we do have to go to court in order to enforce those penalties. And then through the most recent changes to the statute allows us to establish a blight receivership, which is actually to appoint someone to essentially be in charge of remedying the blight at an order of the court. It's sort of a convoluted process, but the legislature really did want to do something with teeth in order to address these things. And this change in the blight receivership, I think, is one that you'll see a lot of improvement on if you have to go that far. It's convoluted, it's expensive, but it's also under the guise of the court. So, if we have to go to that process for any reason, the nice part about the way this ordinance is structured is you have a nice, long, documented list of attempts, list of processes in place in order to make sure that we're balancing the rights of the property owner and ultimately, might be able to win the blight receivership. We do have the ordinance in front of us. We've had, I will say, some really excellent comments from the public on this, going back to our initial discussions. I think we've tried to balance out a lot of the public comment in the versions of the ordinance that you have seen. This is now the third draft of the ordinance. I'll note for those in the room who wish to speak on it, it is not on for passage tonight at the Board of Selectmen meeting. It's on for additional consideration, so if you do have comments on the blight ordinance, we'd ask you to share them. If you have questions for me, we'll try to address them, and then the board will take it up and consider it more at its meeting that follows the public hearing. But right now, the public hearing is really for members of the public to express their thoughts and concerns about the blight ordinance, so that we might make additional considerations before moving this forward any further. So.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks for your work on this also. So, I'm going to open this up to public remarks for consideration in regards to the blight ordinance. If you just raise your hand and so just state your name and address.
If I may. So some folks have come in after this began. I just want to emphasize there's going to be a regular meeting of the Board of Selectmen that begins at 7 o'clock. The commentary right now that council has asked for is related to the blight ordinance, proposed blight ordinance only.
Thanks, Jay. I appreciate that. This one.
Thank you. Thank you. Annie Hornish, 864 Thrall Avenue. I oppose the blight ordinance policy. A person may have medical or financial problems that led to having a blighted property. These situations are all unique, so a one-size-fits-all policy will not work. My aunt had a major problem with hoarding, and she was able to keep it a secret for a very long time, well into her 80s. My aunt was born in Suffield and lived here her entire life. One day, her son had a medical emergency, and she called my husband Neil and me to help clear a path for the ambulance workers. That is when we learned about her massive hoarding problem. We took her in with us at our home in Granby, where we lived for around 8 weeks, while we worked with the Suffield Fire Department and Building Department to get her home habitable. and with social services to get her other kinds of help. The town departments were in Suffield at the time were very wonderful, as were the workers at the Suffield dump. Everyone was very helpful and very compassionate to our family situation, working with us to help my aunt return safely to her home. This is what good governance looks like. We experienced government service that helped my aunt maintain her dignity. When government service is predicated on kindness and compassion, the town's overall potential is maximized through the creation of community goodwill. This blight ordinance, which is not substantially different from the prior draft, lacks that sense of goodness. Quite the opposite. Many people who could be affected are the elderly, many of whom have paid taxes for many years, in some cases a lifetime. The vaguely worded language gives far too much power to government, power that could then be used by town officials to harass individual citizens. This proposal joins the ranks of severally overly punitive proposals by the board, such as the flag policy, the animal ordinance, and the town green proposal, all of which weaponize government seemingly for the purpose of harassing individual citizens and specific groups.
Thank you. Mr. Christian?
Carl Christian, 450 North Grand Street. I'm all for the blight ordinance. What I don't understand is how come the conservation land's been taken off of it.
You want me to address it? You address this? Yeah. All right. Mr. Warner.
Neil Hornish, Doral Avenue. Just to point out some details about what the concerns are. Some of the definitions, Section 3, the definition of the blight enforcement officer says any individual, but it doesn't mention if they require any training to be able to do this job. Under Section 4, Section 5, the special considerations, where it says special considerations may be given to individuals that are disabled, elderly, or low income. I think that should probably be better if that was a shall. And the only special consideration that's given is the enforcement officer may give the person more time to correct the action. So if you have an elderly person living in a house that's falling in disrepair, if they can't afford to fix it, giving them 6 more months to fix it isn't going to change anything. I think there should be a waiver for special instances for elderly or for the disabled who wouldn't be able to afford making the changes. And then finally, under the general Section 7, the enforcement, number 1, general provisions, the 3rd paragraph, it says that the enforcement officer shall serve written notice to the owner. And that one could be by regular mail. Moving down for a citation, it says a citation has to be by certified mail, but both of them say that the failure of the owner to receive the notification doesn't change anything. I think if you're setting up an ordinance where you might be charging a person $100 a day, you should document clearly that the person has absolutely been notified. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jordan Coates, Hickory Street. Couple of questions. First of all, I support the policy and I'm glad that it's being worked on. The definition of blight I was wondering if it could include a situation where the house is vacant, but not necessarily abandoned, and it's got grass and weeds that's like 4 feet tall, and trees, limbs that may have fallen down. So it's not abandoned, but it is vacant for whatever reason. And it's just a matter of the upkeep of the yard. I have read this a couple of times, and I'm just going to point out one other thing that I am unclear about, and that is whether the town has the authority in this document to tear down a building or a house or a structure, if you've gone through all of the steps, it doesn't clearly delineate whether or not the town can bulldoze the structure. And I think it does need to include that in there. We've got a house, if you want to call it, on Hickory Street. It's been at least 10 years since it's been abandoned. This has been abandoned, that house has been abandoned. So that's, I won't take up more time. Those two issues.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else in regards to the blight ordinance? All right, one last time, anyone else? Is there anyone else online?
There's somebody in the back. Right there.
I think they're pointing out.
They wanna-
Okay.
Nobody online?
Can we just generally address some of those things?
Sure.
Yeah. So some really good comments. One of the comments with respect to the conservation land coming out, so conserved land, your protected land is still in, so that hasn't changed. Wetlands area, a building in a wetland structure isn't exempt specifically, so as you look at it, the house on Hickory Street that came up is actually in a wetland. And that's one of the challenge, believe it or not, but the wetlands map shows that entire property in a wetland. So that property and others like it would not be exempt from this. We've taken that part of it out. It wouldn't fall into a loophole there. So that was a good point to bring up. The question of service, I thought, was a good one. The board should discuss that, about at what time we get a service by sheriff or marshal involved. And then, a couple of comments about the vacant but not abandoned. I think we get that in here between the confluence of the language, but I think that's a good one to take a look at from that point of view. And as to the question about can the town bulldoze a structure, the answer is yes, question mark. The town can, it's not through this ordinance. The town has to have, a building has to be condemned by a building official and ordered to be taken down by a building official before it can be done. And that's a process that's spelled out in the state building code, and it would not fall under the blight ordinance. And with respect to that particular property, just for the town is involved in an action to hopefully take care of that in the very near future. So I would say stay tuned, and we will provide an update to folks as that moves along a little bit. So, but those are good comments. So, does anyone else have anything on the blight ordinance before we move on?
We're all set, so.
Okay.
Thanks, Derek, again, and at this point, I'll close the public hearing. And we'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
And all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion carries. Thank you, everybody. We'll begin the regular meeting in 5 minutes.